This is Unforgettable Learning, where we talk to L&D visionaries, experts, and mavericks about performance, creativity, and tech. Subscribe to stay in touch.
Hi, David. It's great to see you. Could you just tell us who you are, what you do, and tell us a bit about your roles and responsibilities with regards to learning?
Sure. Hi, Kate. I'm David Ward. I'm the Regulatory Ethics and Compliance Director at Tesco, which is a job that I've held for a good number of years. Now, I am responsible for the development implementation of our corporate compliance program, which, if you're not familiar with one of those, it's all of the rules and processes and things that we do, including training, that are designed to ensure that our colleagues know what the rules are, that they are able to follow those rules, and that if something goes wrong, that we're able to take action quickly to protect them, protect the business, do what we need to do in case anything goes wrong.
That's a full-time job, it sounds like.
Yeah, full-time, many years, keeps me busy. And look, one big element of that, obviously, is how we do learning, how we train people, I guess, in old speak, sort of what the rules are, and how we do our best to not just sort of tick the box when it comes to compliance training, but actually try and make this stuff engaging and try and use all of the sort of devices at our disposal to ensure, not just that people do it, but that it's relevant to them, it's meaningful to them, and actually they're getting something out of it rather than just thinking that they've just ticked the box and then they go back to doing whatever it was that they were doing before.
I love that you've said that, because so often compliance training is sort of leveled at being kind of boring and tick box and gets a bit of a bad reputation. And what I wanted to talk to you about was your kind of innovation and use of behavioural economics in the kinds of programs certainly that we've worked on, but just how anyone who has a bit of a background or knowledge of behavioural economics and behavioural design can improve their ethics programs potentially. And I'm pretty sure that you introduced me to Dan Ariely many eons ago, so thank you for that. And in his book, Predictably Irrational, he talks about some stats, and I'll share those with you. In 2004, the total cost of all robberies in the United States was $525 million. By contrast, every year, employees' theft and fraud in the workplace are estimated at about $600 billion. As a head of ethics, heard these stats before?
So I've read the book. His books, of course, they're sort of, absolutely full of slightly terrifying statistics. I mean, in a way, it doesn't surprise me, right? In theory, the opportunity to take stuff from an employer or be untruthful in your expense claims, or, there are, I think, quite a lot of opportunities, and I don't say it specifically from perspective of my own employer. I think it is a general point that there are some quite, target rich environments in the workplace. However, I think, and I was just thinking about this as we were prepping, I wonder whether that same figure would be correct today when we work in a much more online environment. We're in the office, not so much. The kinds of stuff that you would find in the office now, I think, are probably not the same kinds of things that you found 20 years ago, right?
So we can't take pens. Here's my...
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, there's still photocopier paper if people want to take that. Yeah. But some of those other things, when people are very reliant on sending letters and, they might take an envelope from the office or pens or things like that. I think some of that just doesn't really exist. It's just not there in the office environment anymore, or would look weird if you just walked off with 5 boxes of stuff. However, does that mean it's moved to other places? Is it possible now to cheat the systems, your expense systems, your travel systems? I don't have any evidence at all, but I do wonder whether the nature, as some of it has gone away, whether some of it's just transferred to slightly more elaborate ways of using your employer's resources for your own benefit.
Well, that's really interesting, because he concluded from his studies that, given the opportunity, many honest people will cheat, and that it's not just a few bad apples, which we might think that these people skewing the figures, committing some terrible crime and, at work. And actually, the majority of people cheated just a little bit. And I know
Correct.
This is kind of, this is old news now. This is a book from nearly 10 years ago, but it does still strike me, and it seems to kind of chime with maybe some thoughts that you're having, that perhaps, and I love that you use the word target-rich environments. That's really interesting. If an opportunity arises that means that we can choose to do something that benefits us, perhaps personally, rather than our employer, would we do it? And I wonder if that's your perhaps daily work. Is that something that you're trying to tackle on a daily basis?
Yeah, I'd like to think not. I mean, look, in my experience, when stuff goes wrong in the office, it's often not actually a matter of sort of personal gain. So, the fudge factor comes in. Can I justify something? Oh, it's only a stapler. I had to work extra hours last month, so it's kind of, I kind of deserve it. There are some things that go wrong in organizations that are very much about classic sort of conflicts of interest, me taking advantage of the company, either the company's resources or knowledge, or, passing tidbits of information onto my other half who's applying for a job or who's trying to win business from my employer. There's a sort of chunk of wrong that is all, I guess, if you like, based around conflicts of interest. And then there is a chunk of wrong that is based around me being incentivized, whether it's through being given targets or being given sort of the wrong direction by the people that I work for, me doing stuff that is wrong, but helps me deliver the number or hit my target or do whatever I'm required to do this month, or keep within a set of policy rules that someone else has designed that, because they didn't think about them properly, mean that, I could get involved in collusion, which is illegal, but it might help me hit my target. So if nobody notices, then actually it might be fine. So I think, in very crude terms, I think there are definitely the sort of conflict of interest type wrongs. But I think there's also those that are driven by, targets, incentives, bonuses, things like that may cause you to do wrong in the furtherance of what you would consider to be a broadly legitimate thing, delivering your number at the end of the month or something.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk a bit about some examples of work that you've done where you've kind of tapped into this human behaviour side. Certainly, I know there's a project that was sort of inspired by using sort of nudges to sort of support completion goals, which I know in the supermarket sector is important, because actually if you don't complete by a certain time of year and everybody's now having to go into the Christmas period, you can't be doing your training at that point. So completion actually does become a goal in that regard. But and also how you've kind of shifted your thinking, which I find quite innovative, away from sort of annual courses to a slightly more sort of fluid approach to training. I think people will find that really fascinating, and you've used kind of behavioural mechanics to support that thinking. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. And look, I think if, like me, you're a lawyer, lawyers often think of training as this tick the box, it got done, we can show you the regulator that, that we did it. And that's fine. That's kind of, entry level compliance learning. I think, look, we always wanted to go further with that in a number of ways. The first, and look, as you'll know, this goes back to the beginning of our relationship as two organizations, is we were looking for stuff that was going to be visually engaging. And because a decade ago when we started doing that, that was quite mold breaking. E-learning was still really in its infancy. A lot of it didn't look very good. learning design was pretty basic, and we had huge impact by turning this stuff from sort of very drab modules to something that was very engaging, very visual. Probably helped at the time that we didn't have very strong design guidelines to follow, so we had a bit more free reign. But actually, look, what we did, and you'll remember this, as well as sort of redesigning a bunch of modules with some very sort of elegant, entertaining characters, we really made the whole thing a campaign. And that meant we had a leaderboard of completion rates. So we sort of gamified it a little bit to bring out a degree of sort of competition between teams. And we had to be really careful with this. What we didn't want to do was make it such a competition that people just did it really quickly, so that it was done, completely the wrong. And look, we saw this with sort of, as we rolled it out to some of our other businesses, people giving out prizes for sort of fastest completion. We're like, no. That's you've got the concept, you've just taken it like
the balance is not quite right
to
there.
The place. Yeah, not where it wants to go.
Yeah.
So look, and you'll remember we had a lander board. You could see how many people had started, how many hadn't, how many had finished, and it really created quite a buzz. So rather than this just being a kind of right, you've got to do your annual compliance training, we gave it a name, as you'll know, which was called Learning Leap. So we got away from those sort of negative buzzwords, mandatory, legal, compliance, training, all that stuff, to a thing that had very loosely its own identity. It was a relatively light-hearted, construction, albeit the content was very, very serious. And as you said, some of this stuff was stuff required by law to be done, every single year. So, it was very serious. And the campaign is very successful. We introduced sort of innovation after innovation in the years that followed. One of the, I think, earliest behavioural interventions we made was updating directors within the organisation during the campaign to tell them which members of their team had finished, had started but hadn't finished, and hadn't started yet. And with one click, they could send a sort of blind copy email to all of those people to either congratulate them or chivvy them along a bit. And that was it's a very modest behavioural breakthrough, but it was really the point when we realised people don't listen to me or my team. They'll listen under suffrage, but the people that will have the most impact on them are the ones that they work for, which, is a statement of the obvious. But I think I still hear often of organizations where, compliance training is done by the compliance team or the legal team or the HR team, and it's implicit that it's their responsibility rather than the responsibility of managers to ensure that everyone does their training. So that if I'm a manager, that's not really my job. I can just leave that to the compliance team to do. And we really changed that around very early on, and it had very important results. And look, I'm blessed now with an organization through many changes, not just through repeated e-learning campaigns, but through many changes of culture over the years, where I think it's absolutely a given that if I'm in a position of seniority, I need the right data and I need it at the right time. But ultimately, it's my job to make sure that my team have done their training, rather than saying, well, if you want them trained, you go and do it. I'm going to continue doing whatever other job I'm employed to do. And that was quite a big change.
Yeah, that's huge. It's certainly some of the work I'm most proud of and still excited about, because I think there are a few things that had to come together for that to be made possible. And the first one is kind of the liberation of data from kind of stuck back in an LMS where it gets dusty and no one looks at it, or maybe 2 or 3 people look at it, to kind of bringing that in and giving it a sort of status of its own, that it was everyone's data. It was available for everybody to see, and it was animated and fun and playful, and it becomes much more about sort of data for storytelling, data as a kind of emotive motivator, and I don't see many people. In fact, you're the only person I know who's kind of rolled with that innovation and kind of pioneered it. So I love that. I love that. And tying everything together to a management framework, that's important too. Being able to give everyone the ability to chivvy along people and get them to complete or give them a congratulatory recognition. All of that stuff, behaviourally, it does matter that people get recognised when they do things the way we want things to happen in an organisation.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. And certainly now the data is such an important part of this. I mean, we manage successfully each year to get people through the campaign without ever really wielding the big stick. We are very reticent about threatening people if they haven't done their training. I would always first want to, deal with non-completion via managers rather than via me or my team having sort of diminishing returns. I will intervene, my team will as well, but it's a kind of end of campaign, last resort thing rather than, the only tool that you have. But actually that use of data, particularly sort of completion rate data, it is in itself is another part of our little, box of tricks for getting people through the campaign. And this plugs in to what I think we can correctly call a social norm or social proof, the simple idea that I'm going to do something if lots of people have done it or are doing it. So what you will see in our campaigns, in the comms are a significant part of the thinking. So it's not just the learning, it's not just the timing and the content, but the comms start, middle, finish that are almost as important as the learning, because that's really how we ensure that people do their stuff. What you will see in our campaigns is as the campaign is coming to an end, so we might have a completion rate 50, 60, something like that %. At that point, we will start telling those that haven't completed, and only those that haven't completed, we will start saying to them, guys, 80% of people, 75, 90% of people have completed their campaign. Get a move on. And that has that sort of social proof. Loads of other people have done it. So implicitly, I want to be part of that group, the majority group, has a really important effect on completion rates. And if you're thinking, well, that's great at the end of the campaign, but how do I get people earlier on? We're not going to go out and say, hey, guys, great news. 20% of people have completed, have completed their learning. That sends
not the
literally the wrong message. It's just saying, well, just don't bother. So what we do in the early parts of the campaign is we will either say, great news is that 1,000 people have already started, or 10,000 modules have already been completed. Look, you'll know we're a big organization. When we do these campaigns, something in the region of sort of 10,000 people will take part, and each person will normally have at least sort of 6 to 8 sort of modules or questions to complete. So we can move pretty quickly with a big number. So, we'll say 3,000 modules have already been completed. No matter that's actually completion-wise, percentage-wise, that might be pretty small. It's a good thing to get people moving with, and it has a really good effect. You always see, I mean, I've never done the control group of kind of service message that said just get on with it versus something that has been designed with a little bit of behavioral science behind it. But we know that we get a strong response to those things because people implicitly want to be in the bigger group, the majority group. So, we're kind of, we're opening a little path for them, to get there and to do that.
And, lots of people will say, well, completion data, that's no metric of learning efficacy. And I think you'd acknowledge that, right? But there is an importance to it that's sort of pragmatic, working at scale, also across geographies. And there's a legal kind of requirement to do that, right?
Yeah, look, that's right. And it may not be an amazing mechanic in terms of, did you learn anything from it?
Yeah.
But it's certainly the first metric you're going to go to, because I would probably still rather have like 100% completion. Maybe some people didn't quite get it, versus like, 30% completion, but, those 30% absolutely, loved it and learned from it. So it does remain the most important metric. But I agree that it's not the only one. I mean, we look at other metrics from time to time. How long did it take someone, to complete a piece of learning? And if it's really quick, that might be a problem. If it took them 3 days, it suggests that, they just kind of left it open. So that's not great. One of the things that we do now with our micro learning, we can maybe talk about that in a second.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I think this is significant. Go on. Yeah.
I was going to say, look, after you answer a question, we ask you how confident you were about getting that right. There's no trick here. Mm-hmm. You say, I was very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident. And we can absolutely start to use that information to try and build a picture of the areas where people might have got the question right, but they weren't very confident about it. Or even worse, they got it wrong, but they were really confident. I mean, those are the people that, you don't want to come across. They're like super confident and wrong. Not the audience. Thankfully, we come across very few of those. But those who are sort of less confident, can we look across areas of the business and say, look, they kind of pass mark, they did all right, decent level of them got it right. But actually, when we correlate that, on our scatter graph with sort of how confident they were, actually, look, this module or this team is a bit of an outlier. So, I think increasingly there are other data points that we can tap into to try and get a sense. I'd say try, because I think that's probably as good as we can do at the moment, to try and get a sense of, whether we've got particular hotspots that, that we need to retarget.
And just so that people understand kind of what you've done with the micro learning, can you explain just a bit about the sort of the tactics of that, how it works?
We, like any good thing, our program has evolved over the years. And in the early years, you did full modules. And, we realized pretty quickly we'd have to change the questions at least each year. We couldn't get people to just keep doing the same thing, which I think is a misconception that many organizations fall into when they create a learning program. They think of it as a one-off. Like, you can't ask people to do exactly the same thing next year. A, because they'll probably remember the answers from the year before. B, they'll just consider it to be a waste of their time. So after a few years, we evolved into a solution where if you could answer a set of questions up front, you didn't need to do the full module. So you can do 5 questions on gift and entertainment, conflicts of interest. We will say that your knowledge is decent enough that you don't need to do, you don't need to redo that full module that you would have done when you joined the organization a year or 2 years before. And then we evolved that on even further to say, actually, since we had decent numbers of people who were sort of getting those upfront questions right, why don't we build our entire campaign around short question-based scenarios that people can do in the flow of their day. So it's a 5-minute exercise. You get 1 a day or 3 a week or however we set it. And you can, get it done during the course of the day. It's a scenario. You have to do some reading. You've got a choice of answers. And then there's some quite detailed feedback that will often lead you on to the gift and entertainment register if you realize you haven't logged something, the conflicts of interest policy, the GSCOP D-list process. Now, actually, we've started supplementing quite a lot of them with video content that we created for other campaigns that we've been able to recycle within our e-learning. So as well as sort of reading the answers, you can get a little bit of bonus content from one of the subject matter experts within the business. Now, we do that. Is everyone going to watch another minute? I mean, maybe not. But actually, the idea is to say, I'm the person who wrote this question. I'm the person that can help you. So if in the future you've got a question about privacy or bribery or fraud or health and safety. I'm the real human being that was involved in writing this question and is involved in managing this risk and implicitly, explicitly protecting you, protecting Tesco. So I'm a human, come talk to me. And we're always very, very clear. We provide their email address. You know, the brief that they have when they do these videos is to be, you know, warm and empathetic, to really help people think, here's an ally, someone that I can actually speak to if I got a question about this. And every year we get good results of people say, oh, someone stopped me in the corridor. They said, I recognize you, you know, from that video. I've just got this question, just what we want to achieve.
I love that kind of startup mentality in a global organization, where if you can create some sort of personal connection somehow through these comms, that feels significant. Lots of really good and interesting things there, and I love how it's been a campaign that's sort of evolved into just questions. And so, casting your mind forward, what sort of future do you see for how this is going to kind of go 2024 and beyond?
I think it would just be kind of, you know, go straight into your brain or something like
yeah,
that.
Exactly.
You just
yeah.
sort of
When
plug
you can
in the
inject
cable
it.
and yeah, exactly. 1 minute, job done. So I think that's a great question. I think two things. One is the importance, and this is a slightly cheat answer, but look, one is the importance of targeting training to the right audience. So our LMS now is integrated via an API, is integrated with our people systems. So we know who everyone is, when they join, which department they work in, what their, you know, work level is within the organization. And that means that through the use of an app, people get a targeted set of training. So some of it everyone will do. Everyone's responsible for health and safety and other topics like that. And some people will get content that is tailored much more to the risks, you know, that they face. I think being able to tailor and continue to tailor content to what someone needs, rather than just, well, here's the full syllabus, everyone's going to do all of it, I think is really important. Because look, the world of regulators has sort of quite rightly seized on the importance of training, and where some bits of legislation make it a legal requirement, most others, the regulator, you know, in describing best practice is going to say, you should have been trained on this stuff. And look, if you mess up, one of the things that we're going to look at in understanding either are you guilty or not, or how big a penalty should you pay, one of the things that we're going to look at is how well trained your organization was. And there are recent examples from the Information Commissioner's Office of companies getting bigger fines because the right people either weren't trained or they didn't complete the training that they should have completed. So in that environment where compliance training is becoming much more of a sort of must do rather than a sort of nice to do, the potential syllabus just keeps on growing. And look, for an organization like ours, you know, we cover so many different risk areas that if you're not careful, you're going to end up with this sort of degree level syllabus of content. And it's not realistic to ask everyone to do everything. I mean, it's not the right approach. I doubt it's what a regulator would want. And it disengages colleagues from the process. So being able to target content effectively, which I think is as much about, you know, the LMS that you're running from, how you can connect that to the data that your organization holds, I think that is critically important. And then, look, I think for the future, I feel sort of duty bound to say something about AI. I mean, the problem is I don't know what it is that I should say in relation to AI. But, you know, look, is it going to be generative AI in terms of content? And actually, I don't need to go through the long, drawn-out, complicated, time-consuming, but obviously very satisfying process of
not all bad, is it?
Yeah, no, well, exactly. Building new content, coming up with interesting ways of engaging people. Look, the last module, my team worked on with Sponge, we created audio content and sort of mini podcast bits in it, some really good, innovative, fun stuff within that. But, is it likely that the process of content creation is going to get easier in years to come? I think it has to, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's got to. So I think, look, on the generative side, I think AI is going to play a role in what we do. And, we could pause for a moment to wonder what that might mean for those who work in creative learning industries, because I think it's going to change quite a lot, but I'm clearly not the person to pontificate on that. I think the other area, of course, is the big data analytics piece of AI, reviewing these very large data sets. And I think I said before, we have made a start in correlating completion rates and confidence rates and times of day of completion and, the impact on this message versus that message. But I mean, I feel like we're only scratching the surface, really, that we could employ someone full time for a few months at the end of a campaign to try and work out, the population's most at risk or the population's least at risk, or the times of day when it's best to complete your training when, your mind is fresh. We're scratching the surface at that. I would like to go much, much further and look in our organization when we do micro-learning campaigns. We're kind of awash with data. Someone may do 20 or 30 questions. Each one of those will have a right answer or a wrong answer. They will have a confidence level for each of those questions, times by thousands of employees who are answering them, sitting in 100 or more different departments. We can scratch the surface of this, but we're not really deep into it. And, we need that sort of computing power, not just to spit out a lot of data, but actually to join the dots for us and tell us, actually, this is where you've got a problem. So use it in a predictive way rather than just as a sort of nice thing to do at the end of a campaign.
You've really hit the nail on the head in terms of kind of data maturity in learning. And I still think we're at a sort of stage in the evolution where few organisations are in that kind of predictive analytics phase, and they're still trying to work out what do we do with it. But also what you said about kind of tying the data together. What story are we telling from this? So what? So what if this has happened? How do I make sense of this? And it's a timely conversation because we're also kind of looking at the analytics solutions in Sponge too. So that's something we can definitely talk about outside of this call. But,
another time, follow-up podcast.
But I wanted to ask you one other thing, just one sort of final thing, I guess, about commitment devices and how you've had any success back to kind of feeling human-centered again and putting the user in the middle of this all, where people have to state whether or not they've breached any codes or commit to certain things. What success or story have you got around that?
We were inspired by the now possibly controversial use of commitment devices in relation to car insurance forms, which of course was one of Dan Ariely's very first sort of groundbreaking experiments. The veracity of which I think seems to have been undermined by follow-up research in the last couple of years. But the idea that you sign up, say something, make a commitment at the beginning rather than at the end, I'm sure is a very, very powerful device. Now, you can't really, with e-learning, you can't really get someone to sign something in reality. I mean, I guess you probably could now if you're doing it on your phone, or you could scribble your name or something. Yeah. But in reality, you're not really going to do that. But what we've tried, and I should say, we've never done this really with control groups. I have honestly no idea how successful it is. But we've tried over the years getting people to write their name, fill in their name at the beginning of a certification process. So we know who you are because we sent you the module to complete, but we get you to type your own name in before you start making a series of declarations around our code of business conduct and things like that. We get you to make a sort of pseudo declaration, if you like, around by writing in your name beforehand, to see if that has any kind of effect on the truthfulness of the statements that you give. I'm a little bit skeptical, if I'm honest. I think it's a perfectly fine thing to do. I mean, we've tried, I think you may remember this, we tried once playing around with the default statement around, I have not breached the code of conduct versus
yes,
I have breached, and then people have to type no rather than the default, which is yes. I think apart from confusing a lot of people, I'm not sure that generated anything that, the behavioural scientists would consider to be sort of proof of anything, unfortunately. But look, what I would say is, particularly organisations that have relatively large pools of users, you can, if you've got, a good firm that you're working with, you can play around with these things. The data sets are big enough that actually if you give half of them option A and half of them option B, and you've got thousands of people in each group, you may well see a difference in outcome, whether it's the messaging to get them through quicker, trialing this message versus that message, whether it's something written into the module itself. I think all these ways, the populations are large enough that actually you can, and I would encourage people to test out different messages, because it's one of those rare occasions where your user group is big enough to see a difference. And also you're probably going to do it next year. So you can learn from, what I did this year. Actually, look, version A of the message worked much better than version B. Fine. Next year, we'll go totally with version A, when we run the same campaign again. So I think there are lots of opportunities there.
Fantastic. And my final question is just to anybody who's been inspired kind of listening to this and hearing you talk about what you've done and the kind of campaign approaches that you've taken, and is sort of interested, I guess, in learning more about behavioural science and how it can influence their programs. Where would you recommend that they start?
Wow. I mean, there has been an explosion of reading materials, of, consultancies that do behavioral science stuff. Lots of people with lots of universities running great master's degrees now in all manner of variants of behavioral psychology. I think, and look, there are TED Talks plenty, podcasts are plenty. If you're interested in this subject, for me, the foundational book is another of Dan Ariely's books, which is The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, which is literally written for people in my position who are obviously trying to get people to do the right thing. But I think it works for anyone who's working in an organization trying to say, how do I get people to not do it like that and do it like this instead? And that could just be about getting your training done rather than trying to stop people committing, bribery or something like that. So I think a really easy way into the world of behavioral science probably is one or any of Dan Ariely's books. There are so many other places that you can go after that. Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman's treatise really on the kind of neuroscience end of behavioral science, literally how does the brain work at that end. You've got Tali Sharot at UCL, whose book The Optimism Bias, it is about what it says on the tin. There are loads of really good books out there. They cover really the full range, from the sort of neurological bit through to the sort of behavioral economics, through to successful marketing campaigns that have been based on, behavioral science. There's a really good stuff, but I would always start with Dan Ariely. I'm not being paid to say this, by the way, but he would always be my starting point.
And practice some stuff, maybe try some hypotheses in your learning programs like you've done, and then sort of iterate over the years. I think taking a long-term view has been certainly helpful on your projects and our projects over the years, but maybe not to think of it as a kind of one and done, inject some behavioural science and we're going to see the impact. We've got to watch and look and try some things out and experiment a bit.
100%. I really agree with that. And the benefit of having done a decade's worth of campaigns means that, we've learned, and trial and error, whether you're using behavioral insight or common sense or something else, that trial and error thing is so important, I think, in getting this right. I mean, for me, the precursor to that is viewing this, I think, as I said right at the beginning, as a campaign that has a start and an end. And, you're going to do a load of activity to get from A to B, but it's think of it holistically as a campaign, I think, is probably the best place that you can start with these things.
Fantastic. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been so lovely to talk to you. And lots of things for people to think about. So thanks so much, David.
Pleasure.
See you again.
Thanks, Kate.
Take care.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to stay up to date with leading lights from L&D and leave us a review to let us know what you think.